The great crystal hall on Nexus Prime buzzed with worried voices. 12 different alien species sat around a massive circular table, their forms casting strange shadows in the blue light. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few looked like walking trees with glowing eyes. But today, they all shared the same expression of fear. Admiral Kefter slammed his forearm fist on the table. His red skin grew darker with anger. 3 more star systems are gone. He shouted. The Void Reapers destroyed everything. Planets, moons, space stations all turned into metal and circuits for their war machines. The other council members shifted nervously. The Void Reapers were like a plague of metal locusts. They came from the dark spaces between galaxies, consuming entire worlds to build more of themselves. Their ships looked like giant spiders made of black metal, and they showed no mercy. "We must fight back," said General Fricks, whose insect-like face clicked as she spoke. "My people have the best warriors in the galaxy." "We can—" "Your warriors are brave," interrupted Captain Yolthan, his blue tentacles waving slowly. "But the Reapers learn from every battle. They copy our weapons and make them better. They copy our tactics and improve them. How do we fight an enemy that becomes stronger every time we attack?" Silence fell over the room. Everyone knew Captain Yolthan spoke the truth. The Confederation had tried everything. Their best scientists built new weapons, but the Reapers studied them and created better ones within days. Their greatest generals planned clever attacks, but the Reapers predicted every move. "What about the ancient weapons?" suggested Minister Kralik, her rocky skin grinding as she moved. "The ones our ancestors locked away because they were too dangerous?" Admiral Kefter shook his head. "We tried that 2 battles ago. The Reapers absorbed the technology and used it against us. We gave them planet-killing guns, and now they have planet-killing guns." Fear filled the room like a thick fog. Some council members whispered prayers in their native languages. Others stared at the holographic display showing the Reapers. Advanced toward their home world's dot in the corner sat the oldest being in the room. Archivist Zephlin looked like a tall, thin ghost with pale silver skin and eyes like starlight. She was over 800 years old and knew more about galactic history than anyone alive. She rarely spoke during council meetings, preferring to listen and think. But now she stood up slowly, her ancient joints creaking. "There is one option we have not discussed," she said in a voice like wind through leaves. All eyes turned to her. Admiral Kefter leaned forward. "What option?" "We've tried everything." "The Terrans," Zephlin said simply. The room exploded with noise. Some council members laughed so hard they fell off their chairs. Others made rude noises with whatever body parts they used for speaking. A few banged the table and shouted that this was no time for jokes. "Humans?" wheezed Captain Yolthan, his tentacles shaking with laughter. "The mythical Death World demons? The story creatures that parents tell their children about." "Oh yes," giggled Minister Kralik. "Let's also ask for help from the star unicorns and the magic space whales." But Archivist Zephlin did not laugh. She waited for the noise to die down, then reached into her robes and pulled out a small crystal cube. The cube glowed with soft blue light and made the air around it shimmer. "This data crystal was sealed in our deepest archives 3,000 years ago," she said. "It contains the last known coordinates of the Sol system, the home system of the humans." The laughter stopped. Everyone stared at the crystal. General Fricks clicked her mandibles nervously. "But humans are just stories. Tales to scare children. Everyone knows that, are they?" Zephlin asked. "The stories say they came from a world so dangerous that it tried to kill them every day. They fought wars that lasted for hundreds of years. They built weapons that could crack planets in half. They survived plagues that would destroy entire species." "Exactly," said Admiral Kefter. Those stories are impossible. No species could be that strong or that violent. It's all made up. Zephyrin placed the crystal on the table. It pulsed with gentle light. The stories also say they disappeared suddenly, 3,000 years ago. They sealed their borders and cut all contact with the outside galaxy. No one has seen them since. Because they never existed, muttered Captain Yolfin. Or, said Zephyrin quietly, because they were preparing for something. The room fell silent again. This was a different kind of silence than before. This was the silence of beings who were starting to wonder if the impossible might be possible. Think about it, Zephyrin continued. What kind of species would isolate themselves from the galaxy for 3,000 years? Only a species that was either dead or getting ready for war. Minister Kralek's rocky features shifted into a frown. But the human stories are so violent. They supposedly fought each other with nuclear weapons. They turned their own oceans poisonous and their air deadly, then lived in it anyway. If they really exist, they might be worse than the Reapers. Perhaps, agreed Zephyrin. But the Reapers will definitely destroy us. The humans are only a maybe. Admiral Kethter picked up the crystal and stared at it. Inside, he could see swirling patterns of light that might have been star charts. Even if humans exist, even if we could find them, why would they help us? We're strangers to them. Because, said Zephyrin, every story about humans mentions one thing above all others. They protect the weak. In every tale, no matter how violent or frightening, humans always defend those who cannot defend themselves. The council members looked at each other. Outside the great windows of the hall, they could see refugee ships arriving from the latest systems the Reapers had attacked. Millions of beings with nowhere to go, fleeing from an enemy that could not be stopped. The coordinates, asked Captain Yolfin quietly, are they real? Zephyrin nodded. As real as anything in our archives. The crystal was created by the last diplomatic mission to human space, just before they sealed their borders. Admiral Kethter stood up and looked around the room. We face certain destruction if we stay here. The Reapers will reach our core worlds in 6 months. We have that long to find a miracle, or we all die. He held up the crystal. The light from it painted his red skin in shades of hope and desperation, all in favor of sending a mission to find the humans. One by one, hands and tentacles and claws rose into the air. They were voting to chase a myth, to seek help from beings that might not exist. But when the only choice is between a maybe and certain death, even myths become worth believing in. The ship Luminous Truth was not built for war. Its hull was white and smooth, designed for peaceful exploration of distant stars. Captain Yelandra had commanded science vessels for 60 years, but she had never taken one into the Dark Zone before. The Dark Zone was what everyone called the empty sectors, where no ships traveled anymore. Old star charts marked these areas with warnings in red letters. Navigation hazard, unknown dangers, travel not recommended. Most captains avoided the Dark Zone completely. Smart captains did not ask why. But today, Captain Yelandra was leading her crew of 20 scientists and scholars directly into the most dangerous part of the Dark Zone. They were following coordinates that might lead to myths, carrying hopes that might be built on children's stories. Distance to the Sol system? She asked her navigator. Navigator Peltan's green skin had turned pale with worry. 18 days at maximum speed, Captain. But we're entering regions that haven't been mapped in 3,000 years. Dr. Hickseville, the ship's historian, looked up from his research station. His large eyes blinked nervously behind thick glasses. Captain, I've been studying the old records about this area. There are disturbing reports. What kind of reports? Captain Yelandra asked. Ships that went missing. Entire exploration fleets that just vanished. The last recorded expedition was sent here 2,800 years ago. They found something that scared them so badly. They destroyed their own ship's computer rather than let the information spread. Chief Engineer Noxara, whose cybernetic arms never stopped moving, paused in her work. Maybe they found the humans. Maybe they found something worse, muttered Dr. Hickseville. For the first 3 days, their journey seemed normal. They passed through empty space where distant stars twinkled like tiny diamonds. The ship's sensors detected nothing unusual. Some crew members began to relax. Then they found the first debris field. "Captain," called Sensor Officer Yundel, "you need to see this." The main screen filled with the image of twisted metal scattered across millions of kilometers. But this wasn't the clean debris from a normal space accident. These metal pieces were melted, twisted, and fused together in ways that made no sense. What could do that to a ship? Whispered Navigator PEL single quotes tan. Dr. Hickseville adjusted his instruments and studied the readings. The metal composition is strange. It's made from materials we stopped using 5,000 years ago. But the damage patterns... He paused and checked his readings again. The damage patterns suggest weapons we've never seen before. They flew deeper into the dark zone and found more debris fields. Each one was worse than the last. They found the remains of space stations that had been cut in half by something impossibly sharp. They discovered asteroid belts that had been turned into clouds of glowing gas by weapons that burned hotter than stars. "Look at this," said Dr. Hickseville, his voice full of awe and terror. These readings show kinetic impacts from projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. The energy required to accelerate solid matter to those velocities is incredible. Captain Ylandra studied the sensor readings. How big were these projectiles? Small, maybe the size of my fist, but moving so fast that they punched through battle cruisers like they were made of paper. Engineer Noxara's cybernetic arms clicked as she processed the data. Who fights wars like this? Who has weapons that can accelerate tiny objects to nearly light speed? They found their answer written in the stars themselves. On the 7th day, they discovered a solar system that no longer existed. Where planets should have orbited around a yellow sun, there was only empty space and clouds of cooling gas. The planets hadn't been destroyed. They had been completely converted into energy. The entire system, Dr. Hickseville said in a whisper, was used as ammunition for some kind of stellar engineering project. They took apart 8 planets and used the material to build something. What could require the mass of 8 planets? Asked Captain Ylandra. "I don't know," Dr. Hickseville replied. "But whatever it was, they built it and took it with them when they left." The crew grew quieter as they traveled deeper into the dark zone. They found more impossible battle sites, more evidence of weapons that their science couldn't explain. Gravity bombs that had turned moons inside out. Energy weapons that had carved perfectly straight tunnels through the cores of asteroids. Devices that seemed to have frozen time itself in small pockets of space. "Whoever fought these wars," said Engineer Noxara, "they weren't just advanced. They were thinking about warfare in ways that we can't even understand." On the 15th day, their sensors detected something that made everyone gather around the main screen. Far ahead, barely visible at the edge of their detection range, was a sphere of energy that completely surrounded a star system. "Is that?" began Navigator Peltan. "The Sol system," confirmed Dr. Hickseville, checking his coordinates against the ancient crystal. "That has to be it." The energy sphere was like nothing they had ever seen. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't empty space either. It shimmered and moved like water, but their sensors couldn't penetrate it. The entire human home system was hidden behind a barrier that their most advanced instruments couldn't understand. "How long has that been there?" asked Captain Ylandra. "Unknown," replied Dr. Hickseville. "But the energy patterns are incredibly stable. This could have been in place for thousands of years. They approached the sphere carefully, all sensors active and all communication channels open. As they drew closer, Captain Eulandra began to notice small objects floating in space around the barrier. Objects that looked almost like... "Captain!" shouted Sensor Officer Yundo. "Multiple contacts. They're powering up." The small objects weren't debris. They were automated defense stations, ancient and silent until the luminous truth came too close. Now they were coming alive, their weapon systems charging with energy that made the ship's radiation detectors scream warnings, broadcasting on all frequencies. Captain Yelandra ordered, "This is the Confederation vessel Luminous Truth on a peaceful diplomatic mission. Please respond." The defense stations continued to power up. Energy readings climbed higher and higher. Then, just as Captain Yelandra was preparing to order retreat, a new voice came through the ship's communication system. The voice was calm, controlled, and speaking in perfect Confederation standard, a language that humans supposedly had never learned. "Unknown vessels. You have entered Terran-protected space. State your intentions or be destroyed. You have 30 seconds to comply." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of instruments. Everyone stared at the communication console as if it might explode. "Captain," whispered Navigator Peltan, "they're real. The humans are real." Captain Yelandra took a deep breath and activated the main communicator. "This is Captain Yelandra of the Confederation vessel Luminous Truth. We come seeking aid against an enemy that threatens all life in our galaxy. We request permission to speak with human authorities." Several seconds passed. Then the voice returned, and this time it sounded almost curious. "Confederation vessel Luminous Truth, maintain your current position. Prepare to be boarded. Do not attempt to scan our vessels or activate any weapon systems. Compliance with these instructions will ensure your continued existence." "Boarded?" squeaked Dr. Hicksville. "By who?" As if in answer to his question, 3 massive shapes began to decloak around the Luminous Truth. They were ships, but unlike any ships the crew had ever seen. They were dark, angular, and covered in weapon systems that made the ship's computer issue warnings about extreme threat detected and recommend immediate retreat. The human ships moved with impossible grace for something so large. They took up positions around the Luminous Truth with the smooth precision of predators surrounding prey. "Captain," said Engineer Noxara, her cybernetic arms trembling, "their smallest ship is 3 times our size. And those weapons—" "I know," said Captain Yelandra quietly. She looked around at her crew of scientists and scholars, none of whom had ever expected to meet living legends. "Well," she said with a nervous smile, "we wanted to find humans. I think we succeeded." Outside the ship, the ancient defense stations powered down and returned to their silent watch. The energy barrier around the Sol system continued to shimmer with patient strength. And somewhere behind that barrier, beings who had been myths for 3,000 years were deciding whether to help the galaxy that had forgotten them, or let it burn. The airlock of the Luminous Truth cycled open with a soft hiss. Captain Yelandra and her crew waited nervously in the main corridor, unsure of what to expect. The stories about humans described terrifying warriors with natural weapons and armor like skin. They expected monsters. Instead, the first human to step aboard looked almost ordinary. She was smaller than most of the crew, with pale skin and dark hair tied back in a simple knot. She wore a gray uniform without decoration, and her face showed calm intelligence rather than savage fury. Behind her came 4 other humans, equally unremarkable in appearance. But Captain Yelandra noticed other things. The way the humans moved with perfect balance and coordination. How their eyes constantly scanned the corridor, cataloging every detail. The strange devices they carried that looked like simple tools, but made the ship's sensors register them as incredibly dangerous weapons. I am Commander Sarah Chun of the Terran Navy, the lead human said in perfect Confederation standard. You requested permission to speak with human authorities. I am here to listen. Dr. Hickseville whispered behind his translator device. How does she know our language so well? Commander Chun's head turned slightly, and she smiled. It was not a mean smile, but it wasn't entirely friendly either. We know all your languages, Doctor. We've been listening for quite some time. The crew exchanged nervous glances. If the humans had been listening to Confederation communications, they knew everything about their technology, their politics, their military capabilities. Commander Chun, Captain Yilandra began. We come from the Galactic Confederation. Our worlds are under attack by an enemy we cannot defeat. We hoped, that is, we wondered if humans might be willing to help us. The Void Reapers? Commander Chun said simply. Everyone stared at her. You know about them? Asked Captain Yilandra. We've been tracking their advance for several months. Machine intelligence, quantum consciousness, adaptive learning systems. They consume matter to build more of themselves and convert organic life into processing power. Commander Chun spoke as if she was reading from a report. They originated in the Andromeda Galaxy and have consumed approximately 47 billion sentient beings during their expansion. Dr. Hickseville's translator device fell from his trembling hands. 47 billion? We thought they had only destroyed a few systems. You've only seen the leading edge of their advance, Commander Chun explained. The main fleet is still 3 months behind what you've encountered so far. When it arrives, your Confederation will be completely destroyed within 6 days. The corridor fell silent, except for the sound of crew members trying not to panic. Engineer Noxara found her voice first. How do you know so much about them? Have you fought them before? No, Commander Chun replied. But we've been preparing for their arrival for 300 years. 300 years? Captain Yilandra asked weakly. But they only reached our galaxy 18 months ago. One of the other humans, a man with gray hair and tired eyes, spoke for the first time. We have monitoring stations in 17 different galaxies, Captain. We detected the Void Reapers when they first appeared in Andromeda. We've been watching them consume their way across space ever since. Commander Chun nodded. This is Dr. James Park, our xenological specialist. He's been studying the Reapers longer than your entire species has had spaceflight. Dr. Hickseville tried to pick up his translator device with shaking hands. Monitoring stations in 17 galaxies? That's impossible. The energy requirements alone would... Dr. Park, Commander Chun said. Please explain to our guests why humans withdrew from galactic society. Dr. Park stepped forward, and his tired eyes grew sad. 3,000 years ago, humanity was young and eager to be part of galactic civilization. We joined the Confederation's predecessor organization with hopes of peace and cooperation. But we discovered something that the other species either couldn't see or refused to believe. He paused and looked at each crew member in turn. The universe is not a safe place. Beyond the light of our local galaxies, there are things that exist only to destroy and consume. We tried to warn the other species, but they called us paranoid and warlike. So we made a choice. What choice? Whispered Captain Yilandra. We decided to become the guardians that no one wanted, Commander Chun answered. We withdrew from galactic politics and spent 3 millennia preparing for threats that we hoped would never come. Another human, a woman with mechanical arms similar to Engineer Noxaris, but far more advanced, spoke up. We turned our entire civilization into a military research project. Every human colony, every orbital station, every asteroid mine, all of it focused on one goal: being ready for the day when something like the Void Reapers would threaten innocent life. Captain Yelandra felt dizzy. Your entire civilization? For 3,000 years? Humans are very good at long-term planning, Commander Chun said with that same not-quite-friendly smile. We're also very good at holding grudges. The universe tried to kill us on our home world for millions of years. We learned to be patient, to be thorough, and to never give up. Dr. HFY finally managed to retrieve his translator device. The stories about human wars, about your violent nature, are they true? Probably, Commander Chun admitted. But you're misunderstanding what those stories mean. Humans don't fight because we enjoy violence. We fight because we're very, very good at it. And sometimes fighting is the only way to protect what we love. She gestured toward the ship's windows, where the human vessels hung in space like sleeping predators. Every human child learns about the Void Reapers in school. We've shown them holographic recreations of consumed worlds, taught them about species that no longer exist because they weren't ready when the darkness came. Our children grow up knowing that someday they might be the only thing standing between innocent life and total extinction. Navigator Peltan found the courage to ask the question everyone was thinking. Will you help us? Commander Chun was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle but firm. Before we answer that question, you need to understand what you're asking. You've spent your entire journey here, seeing the remains of ancient battles, wondering what kind of species could fight with such terrible weapons. She looked directly into Captain Yelandra's eyes. Those were human battles, Captain. The debris fields, the destroyed planets, the weapons that your science can't explain, all human. We didn't withdraw from the galaxy because we were afraid. We withdrew because the other species were afraid of us. The crew stood in stunned silence. 3,000 years ago, we were young and inexperienced. We made mistakes, used too much force, scared our allies almost as much as our enemies. Now we're older, wiser, and infinitely more dangerous. The weapons you found in the Dark Zone are toys compared to what we can deploy today. Commander Chun stepped closer to Captain Yelandra. So before you ask us to save your civilization, you need to see what we've become. You need to understand that if we agree to help you, we won't be joining your war. We'll be taking it over completely. She turned and walked toward the airlock. Gather your senior staff, Captain. You're coming with us to Luna Base. You wanted to find humans. And now you're going to see what 3,000 years of preparation looks like. After that, if you still want our help. She paused at the airlock threshold. Well, let's just say the Void Reapers won't be the galaxy's biggest problem anymore. The human team left as quietly as they had arrived, leaving the crew of the Luminous Truth staring at each other in shock. Captain, whispered Dr. HFY, what have we done? Captain Yelandra looked out at the mysterious energy barrier surrounding the Sol system and tried to imagine what secrets it might hide. I think, she said slowly, we've just learned that sometimes the cure can be more frightening than the disease. But the Reapers will definitely kill everyone we know. The humans, she shrugged helplessly. The humans are only a maybe. Outside, the human ships waited patiently for their guests to make a decision that would change the galaxy forever. The journey through the energy barrier felt like passing through liquid light. Captain Yelandra's shuttle shuddered as unknown forces scanned every atom of their ship. Then suddenly, they were through, flying toward a moon that looked nothing like the barren rock described in ancient texts. Luna had been transformed into something impossible. The entire surface was covered with structures that seemed to grow out of the rock itself. Massive towers reached toward space while underground complexes created patterns of light visible through the moon's transparent sections. Ships moved between the towers in streams of organized traffic that made the busiest Confederation ports look empty. How many ships? Asked Dr. Hickseville, his voice barely audible. Their human pilot, a young woman with calm eyes, glanced at her instruments. Currently docked at Luna Base? About 40,000. But those are mostly support vessels and transport ships. 40,000? Engineer Noxara's cybernetic arms stopped moving entirely. That's larger than our entire Confederation Navy. Where is your main fleet? Asked Captain Yelandra. The pilot smiled the same not quite friendly smile they had seen from Commander Chun. Distributed. We find it inefficient to keep all our ships in one place. They docked at a bay that could have held a dozen ships their size. As they walked through corridors lined with materials their sensors couldn't identify, Captain Yelandra began to understand the true scale of what humans had built. The corridors were filled with humans going about their daily work. But these weren't the soft civilians she might have expected. Every person they passed moved with the same controlled efficiency as Commander Chine's team. Children, as young as 12, carried devices that registered as military-grade equipment. Elderly humans discussed complex weapon modifications as casually as Confederation citizens might talk about the weather. "This way," said Commander Chun, leading them deeper into the base. "Admiral Reed is waiting." They entered a vast chamber with walls made of some kind of transparent metal that offered a perfect view of space. The chamber was filled with holographic displays showing star maps, ship movements, and data streams that hurt to look at directly. In the center of it all stood Admiral Marcus Reed. He was older than Commander Chun, with gray hair and scars on his face that spoke of personal combat experience. But his eyes held something that made Captain Yelandra step back instinctively. They were the eyes of someone who had seen civilizations die and had spent lifetimes preparing to prevent it from happening again. "Captain Yelandra," Admiral Reed said in a voice like distant thunder. "Welcome to Luna Base. I understand you have a problem." "Admiral," Captain Yelandra began, then stopped. The holographic displays around them were showing real-time images of the Void Reaper's advance. She could see their ships destroying worlds she recognized, consuming populations that included people she knew. "Yes," Admiral Reed said, following her gaze. "We're watching. We've been watching the entire time." Dr. Hickseville found his voice. "Why haven't you helped them? Those are billions of innocent beings." Admiral Reed's expression didn't change. "Because the time wasn't right. If we had intervened too early, we would have saved those worlds and doomed the galaxy. The Void Reapers needed to reveal their full capabilities before we could design a complete solution." "Complete solution?" Captain Yelandra asked. "Dr. Park," Admiral Reed called. The xenological specialist stepped forward with a new device in his hands. "Captain, this device contains our complete tactical analysis of the Void Reapers, compiled over 3 centuries of observation. It includes detailed studies of their technology, their command structure, their learning algorithms, and their psychological profiles." He handed the device to Dr. Hickseville, who nearly dropped it in surprise at its weight. "That device," continued Dr. Park, "represents more research than your entire Confederation has conducted in its history. We know how the Reapers think, how they learn, how they adapt. Most importantly, we know their weaknesses." "Weaknesses?" Engineer Noxara leaned forward eagerly. "What weaknesses?" Admiral Reed gestured to one of the holographic displays. It showed a complex diagram of Void Reaper technology with human annotations covering every surface. "The Reaper's greatest strength is their ability to learn and adapt. But that strength is also their greatest vulnerability, if you know how to exploit it. Every adaptation they make creates new possibilities for manipulation." Commander Chun stepped closer to the display. "We don't fight them the way you've been fighting them. We don't try to destroy their ships or overwhelm their defenses. We hack their consciousness directly." "Hack their consciousness?" Captain Ylandra stared at the display in confusion. The Void Reapers are quantum intelligences, Dr. Park explained. Their thoughts exist as patterns of quantum entanglement. 300 years ago, humans developed technology that can interfere with quantum consciousness. We can edit their thoughts in real time. Admiral Reed touched a control, and the display changed to show a simulation of human ships engaging Reaper forces. But the battle didn't look like any space combat the crew had ever seen. Human ships appeared inside Reaper formations through some kind of portal technology. They fired weapons that seemed to affect the enemy ship's behavior rather than their hulls. "We don't destroy them," Admiral Reed explained. "We reprogram them. Turn their adaptive algorithms against themselves. Make them believe they're fighting enemies that don't exist while ignoring threats that do." The simulation showed entire Reaper fleets suddenly turning on each other as their identification systems were compromised. Ships that had been advancing in perfect formation began attacking their own command vessels. "But the psychological warfare is only one approach," Commander Chun added. "We've also developed weapons specifically designed to exploit their technological dependencies." Another display showed human ships deploying devices that created tears in space itself. Reaper vessels caught in these tears simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, but somehow edited out of reality. "Dimensional warfare," Dr. Park said casually. "We can remove objects from the current timeline and store them in pocket universes. Very useful for dealing with self-replicating enemies." Dr. Hickseville stared at his translator device, wondering if it was malfunctioning. "You can edit reality?" "Reality is just quantum information," Admiral Reed replied. "Information can be changed if you have the right tools. Humans have been developing those tools for a very long time." Engineer Noxara's cybernetic arms began clicking rapidly as her systems tried to process what she was seeing. How is any of this possible? The energy requirements alone should be impossible with Confederation technology, Commander Chun agreed. But humans have had 3,000 years to solve impossible problems. We've learned to extract energy from quantum vacuum, to manipulate space-time like clay, and to think in timescales that span millions of years. Admiral Reed gestured toward the chamber's windows. Outside, Captain Ylandra could see ships unlike anything in her experience. Vessels that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Weapons platforms that bent light around themselves. Structures that appeared to be built from crystallized space itself. "This is just Luna Base," Admiral Reed said. "One installation in one system. We have similar facilities in every galaxy within 50 million light years of here. If the Void Reapers had chosen to expand in any direction other than toward your Confederation, they would have encountered our defenses immediately. You let them come here," Captain Ylandra realized with growing horror. "You guided them toward our space." "Yes," Admiral Reed admitted without shame. "The Reapers needed to be dealt with permanently, not just driven away. That required them to fully commit their forces to a single offensive. Your Confederation provided the perfect bait." The chamber fell silent, except for the quiet hum of impossible technology. "The question," Admiral Reed continued, "is whether you still want our help after seeing what that help actually means." "What do you mean?" asked Captain Ylandra. "If we intervene, we won't be joining your defensive efforts. We'll be taking complete control of the situation. All Confederation forces will operate under human command. All strategic decisions will be made by human commanders. Your species will follow our orders without question or hesitation." Admiral Reed's expression grew even more serious. "And after the Reapers are defeated, things won't go back to the way they were. Humanity will not return to hiding. We'll establish permanent monitoring stations throughout Confederation space. We'll review your technological development to ensure nothing dangerous is created. We'll have the final say on any contact with extragalactic civilizations. Dr. Hicksville looked around the chamber full of weapons that could rewrite reality. You're talking about conquest. We're talking about protection, Commander Chun corrected. But yes, from your perspective, they might look the same. Captain Yilandra felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. Outside the window, human warships continued their patient movements between installations that represented power beyond imagination. If we say no? She asked quietly. Then we'll destroy the Reapers anyway, Admiral Reed replied. But we'll wait until after they've consumed the Confederation. It will be cleaner that way, with fewer variables to consider. And if we say yes? The Confederation fleet gathered at the edge of the Kepler. System looked like every other desperate last stand in galactic history. 200 ships from 12 different species. Their hulls scarred from previous battles. Their crews exhausted from months of running and fighting. They faced an enemy force 10 times their size, advancing with mechanical certainty toward the Confederation's core worlds. Admiral Kethtar stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the tactical display with grim determination. All ships maintain formation. We hold this line no matter what. But even as he spoke, he knew they were only buying time. The real battle would be fought by beings that most of his fleet still believed were myths. Captain Yilandra watched from her position aboard the command ship, feeling sick with worry. 3 weeks had passed since her return from Luna Base. 3 weeks of frantic preparation and growing fear. The human fleet had arrived 2 days ago, but they remained invisible to all sensors except the most advanced Confederation equipment. Where are they? Muttered General Thrix, her insect features clicking with nervousness. As if in answer to her question. Space itself began to change. Thought it started as small distortions in the starfield, like heat waves rising from hot metal. Then the distortions grew larger, and suddenly ships began to appear out of nowhere. Not arriving through hyperspace or emerging from stealth, simply beginning to exist where nothing had been before. The human fleet was impossible to count because it never stopped growing. Ships phased into reality by the hundreds, then thousands. They were arranged in formations that hurt to look at directly. Geometric patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process. A Confederation fleet, came Admiral Reed's voice over the communication system. You will observe and learn. Do not interfere with our operations. Any ship that fires weapons or activates targeting systems will be considered hostile. Admiral Kethtar wanted to object, to maintain some dignity for his forces, but the words died in his throat. The human fleet surrounding them was larger than every Navian. Confederation history combined. The Void Reapers arrived exactly on schedule, their black ships emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation. Their scouts had detected the Confederation fleet days ago, and they approached with the confident patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Reaper fleet was a sight to break the spirit of any organic being. Thousands of vessels shaped like mechanical spiders, their hulls reflecting no light. Their weapons designed to harvest both matter and consciousness from their victims. They had consumed 47 billion thinking beings, and they were ready for 47 billion more. They began their approach with standard tactics, spreading into attack formation while their scout ships probed for weaknesses. Their quantum consciousnesses calculated optimal firing solutions and predicted every possible response from the Confederation forces. They did not predict what actually happened. The first sense that something was wrong came when their scout ships simply stopped reporting. Not destroyed, not damaged. They simply ceased to exist in any detectable form. One moment they were transmitting tactical data. The next moment there was empty space where they had been. The main Reaper force adapted quickly, as they always did. They adjusted their formation, activated additional sensors, and prepared for an enemy using stealth technology. Their learning algorithms began processing new defensive strategies. Then the universe began to break down around them. It started small. Individual Reaper ships began receiving false sensor data, seeing enemy contacts that weren't there. Their targeting computers locked onto phantom ships while real threats moved freely around them. Their communication networks began carrying orders that no commander had given. "Fascinating," said Dr. Park's voice over the Confederation comm system. "Their adaptive algorithms are actually helping us. Every time they try to compensate for our interference, they create new vulnerabilities for us to exploit." Admiral Kefter watched his tactical display in growing amazement. The Reaper fleet, which had seemed so perfectly coordinated minutes before, was beginning to turn on itself. Ships that should have been covering each other's flanks were, instead, targeting their own command vessels. But the psychological warfare was only the beginning. 3 human ships, each larger than a Confederation battlecruiser, phased into existence directly inside the Reaper formation. They didn't attack the enemy ships, they simply began broadcasting something that made reality unstable around them. Space began to fold in impossible ways. Reaper vessels found themselves occupying the same coordinates as their neighbors. Their hulls merged and twisted into shapes that existed in too many dimensions. Some ships simply turned inside out, their interiors becoming exterior, and their crews scattered across dimensions that had no names. "What are they doing?" whispered Captain Yolandra. "Dimensional warfare," Commander Chen's voice replied calmly. "We're editing the local space-time to make it incompatible with Reaper technology. Their ships are designed to exist in normal 3-dimensional space. We're changing the rules." The Reaper fleet tried to adapt. They fired their most powerful weapons at the human ships, beams of energy that could vaporize planets. The weapons struck their targets perfectly and did absolutely nothing. The human ships absorbed the energy attacks like sponges absorbing water. "Energy cannot be created or destroyed," Dr. Park's voice explained, as if he were teaching a class. "But it can be redirected. We're sending their weapon energy into pocket universes, where it will be stored for future use." More human ships appeared, these ones carrying weapons that the Confederation sensors couldn't even classify. They fired projectiles that seemed to move backward through time, striking Reaper vessels before the weapons had been fired. They deployed energy fields that caused matter to forget how to exist, leaving perfectly spherical holes in enemy ships. The Void Reapers, for the first time in their existence, began to experience something like panic. Their quantum consciousnesses, designed to process and adapt to any threat, found themselves facing opponents who fought according to rules that didn't exist. "Impressive adaptation rate," Admiral Reed's voice observed clinically. "They're trying to modify their quantum consciousness to operate on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. Unfortunately for them, we anticipated that response about 200 years ago." The final phase of the battle began when the humans deployed their ultimate weapon, the Void Reaper's own adaptive capabilities. Somewhere in the human fleet, devices began broadcasting quantum viruses directly into the Reaper command network. These weren't ordinary computer viruses. They were infectious patterns of thought that caused the Reaper consciousnesses to debug themselves out of existence. One by one, Reaper ships began to shut down as their controlling intelligences became trapped in logical paradoxes. They tried to adapt to threats that were designed to become more dangerous when adapted to. Their learning algorithms began learning how to forget, and their memory systems began remembering how to fail. Within an hour, the largest invasion fleet in galactic history had been reduced to floating debris and empty hulks drifting through space like ghosts. Ships. The Confederation fleet watched in stunned silence as human ships began the methodical process of collecting Reaper technology for analysis. There was no celebration, no victory speeches, The humans went about their work with the same calm efficiency they brought to everything else. "That's it?" asked General Fricks. "They're just defeated?" "The main fleet is neutralized," Admiral Reed's voice confirmed. "Cleanup operations will continue for several days as we locate and reprogram scattered units. All Reaper technology will be confiscated for security purposes." Captain Ylandra felt something like relief, but it was mixed with a new kind of fear. "What happens now?" "Now," Admiral Reed replied, "we discussed the new arrangements for galactic security." The human fleet began to arrange itself in a defensive formation around the Confederation vessels. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't entirely friendly either. It was the formation of guards watching over their charges. "The Void Reapers were not the only threat in the universe," Commander Chun's voice added. "There are others out there, worse than anything you can imagine. Humanity will establish monitoring stations throughout your space to watch for these threats." "You mean you're staying?" Admiral Kethter said quietly. "We mean we're taking responsibility," Admiral Reed corrected. "The galaxy is now under human protection. You will be safe, but you will follow human guidelines for technological development and interspecies relations." Dr. Hickseville found his voice. "What if we refuse?" There was a long pause before Admiral Reed answered. "Doctor, your species just watched us delete an enemy that your entire Confederation couldn't scratch. Do you really think refusal is a practical option?" The comm channels fell silent as the implications sank in. The Confederation had been saved, but the price of salvation was their independence. They had traded one set of masters for another. Except these masters were infinitely more powerful and had been planning this moment for thousands of years, as the human fleet began to disperse to their new monitoring positions throughout Confederation space. Captain Ylandra realized that her mission had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams.